You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. Curious about the one belief that might be quietly holding you back? Stay tuned to explore its powerful impact in today's episode. This episode contains adult subject matter, and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we explore how uncovering and transforming your core belief can lead to profound personal growth. Our guest shares how this powerful, deeply held belief shapes the way we see ourselves and the world, and what it takes to challenge it and create lasting change. Sabrina Trobak lives in Fort St. John, BC, Canada, and is a registered counselor and is the author of Not Good Enough, Understanding Your Core Belief and Anxiety. She is also a clinical supervisor and public speaker and has her master's in counseling psychology. Prior to becoming a counselor, Sabrina was a teacher, vice principal, and school counselor for over 20 years. Sabrina has extensive training in resolving past trauma and the impact trauma has on a person, including anxiety and the core beliefs not good enough, not important, and not valued. Her focus in her counseling practice is to help people challenge and change their core beliefs of not good enough, not important, not valued, to good enough, important, and valued. Let's meet Sabrina Trobak. Hi, Sabrina. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because transforming your core belief is such an intriguing topic for our conversation today. I actually can't wait to dive in and learn more about this. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you like to start us off maybe with a little bit about yourself so our listeners can get to know you? Maybe a bit of where your story started and how that connects to what you do today. And also let our listeners know what it is that you do today so they get a bit of an idea.
Sure. So I live in northern British Columbia, Canada. I'm in Fort St. John. I grew up here, moved away for about 20 years. While I was away, I took my education degree and became a teacher. And I was a learning assistant teacher mostly, basically did all kinds of different areas of study, but mainly as a learning assistant teacher for about 20 years. Towards the end of my teaching career, I got into school counseling and I went to a workshop on suicide that was looking at suicide from the perspective of our core belief feeling not good enough. And at the end of the 3-day workshop, I just thought, this is what I need to do. I contacted Tony Martins, who was the presenter of the workshop, and we went back and forth for about a year, and he agreed to teach me his model of therapy. So I quit teaching and started my own private practice in 2010, working around that idea of our belief not good enough, not important, not valued, and how do we challenge and change that core belief so we feel more good enough, important, and valued. Within about 6 months of my agency being up and running, I've had a waiting list. My waiting list right now is currently about a year long, and I hate having to tell people, sorry, there's nothing I can do. So I decided to write a book that provides a resource for people who can't access counseling for whatever reason. So the book is a therapeutic kind of handbook. So you read a bit of information, and then you're applying the information that you read to your own personal experiences and activities.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And that sounds very helpful, by the way, to have a handbook for that. I know that in many places in the world, the waiting times for mental health services or counseling services are quite extensive. And it's very good to know that there's some support that people can turn to in those times that they need that. It's interesting that you're coming from an educational background because, of course, we have also younger people who are seemingly feeling more challenged with the world and also experience more mental health challenges than maybe ever before. So, do you work mainly with younger people or do you work with everyone, with adults as well?
That's been an interesting kind of transition that's happened. I assumed when I quit teaching and started my practice that I would be working more with youth. But what I find is I'm actually spending more time working with adults. It's much easier for adults to pass it down to their children than for children to try to pass it upwards to the parents. So the vast majority of my clients are adults in their 20s. I have clients all the way up into their 70s, though, as well, but definitely more the adults that I work with. I do work with some children, but my rule generally is if I'm working with kids, I also need to work with at least one parent.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do feel that the core belief often comes from when we were younger, but also still affects us when we are in our adulthood and then we're starting to battle the ripple effects of that core belief. So, is the core belief of not being good enough, is that sort of a main core belief, or can a person have more than one core belief, let's say, or is there usually one that kind of dominates?
Again, everyone's a bit individual, so it kind of depends. But generally, what we find is everything kind of funnels down to three kind of basic ones: feeling not good enough, not important, or not valued. So, usually, if we just dig a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, we find one, two, or all three of those are often the ones that are kind of at the basis of everything.
It's interesting that you say that because a lot of the pieces, even in relationships, finances, really anything across the board, our work, this not good enough core belief tends to show up in all sorts of varieties. So, yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Can you maybe give us some examples of how you've seen this core belief show up, maybe with yourself or your clients? What do people usually struggle with when they have this as a core belief of not being good enough or not being important?
I think one of the main things that we see fairly consistently is a lack of confidence. If I feel not good enough or not important or not valued, I often don't have a lot of confidence. I don't believe in myself as much as I would if my core belief was different. Now, that can look like a variety of different ways. It can be someone who's very passive and quiet and doesn't really say anything, doesn't have a voice, but it can also look like someone who's really aggressive and domineering and controlling. We often think that person is confident, but that's not really confident. If I'm having to have my voice over top of everyone else, that's insecurity and self doubt. So we see it looking a bit different, but bottom line, we see that there as well. The other one that often comes with self doubt is higher levels of anxiety. Anxiety is lack of confidence, not believing in myself I can handle things. A lot of people talk about anxiety being about the trigger. I have anxiety of heights, say, for example. Well, if it was about heights, then every single person on the face of the earth would have anxiety of heights. Not everyone does. Anxiety is about my belief in my ability to handle it. So if I believe I can handle heights, I'm not going to have anxiety. If I don't believe I can handle heights, I'm going to have more anxiety. So again, anxiety connects to lack of confidence. Lack of confidence is a symptom of that core belief: not good enough, not important, not valued.
That actually makes a lot of sense. And I think there might be some aha moments for our listeners at this time as well. Because very often we're told that anxiety is sort of a result of our life circumstances or whatever is going on at the moment. Maybe we can't handle certain things, but very interesting that this could connect back to a core belief that we're holding. Now, if we look at your book for a moment, which is called Not Good Enough, Understanding Your Core Belief and Anxiety, are there some exercises in the book that people could start off with maybe? I think some people might have a hard time recognizing that what's going on actually is related to a core belief. So, are there maybe some exercises to become more aware of that or to start that process of understanding that there could be a core belief behind all this?
Definitely. I find that with a lot of my clients, they'll come in and they don't really have an understanding or an awareness of that core belief. But once we start talking and I explain it in different ways, they say, Yeah, that's exactly what I've been feeling, but I didn't realize that's what it was. So, really, in the book, the very first step is just gaining an awareness. What does that core belief look like? How does it present itself in different ways for different people? There's a lot of information around just understanding what that core belief is, activities where you're then taking that information, applying it to yourself and your own core belief so you can gain more of that awareness around what that is. If you're not aware, you're not going to do anything about it. You don't even know you need to do anything about it. So becoming aware is really the first step in really challenging and sorting through and changing that core belief.
Yeah, I feel like that really could be a difficult part because, like I said, if you're taking it as this is my life and I can't do anything about it, you're not going to be looking for the fact that there might be a core belief there. So diving into this awareness and actually then realizing that you could change this and you could maybe make a transformation in that moment. So that sounds really great. If I've come to the point where I'm understanding that maybe my core belief is interfering in my life a little bit, what are my next steps? If I can't work with you at the moment because you're busy with clients, is there something in the book that will guide me to the next steps, which I could be doing?
After we look at that first step of just the awareness of what that core belief in the book, then we start talking a bit about anxiety and how anxiety is a reflection of that core belief and what anxiety looks like and what's actually happening. A lot of people feel like anxiety is kind of this cloud that overcomes them and they have no real control over it. That's just not what happens. We have a thought that creates a chemical reaction that we then feel physiologically in our body. So our thoughts create our emotions. Now, people who have higher anxiety, a lot of times those thoughts are in their unconscious. They're not even aware they're there. So, again, how can they do anything about these anxious thoughts if they're not even aware they're there? So, we have to become more aware of what are those anxious thoughts? What are the things that we kind of do and say to ourselves that reinforce and feed this anxiety? What does our anxiety look like? A lot of us know what our anxiety looks like when it's panic attack mode, kind of 10 out of 10. But we don't necessarily know what it looks like when it's a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 out of 10, which means we're not doing anything about it until it's really, really, really high. Well, by then, we got a lot of work to do to bring it back down. So, what we look at in the book is what are some more subtle symptoms of anxiety that I can start to become aware of earlier on? Then, if I put strategies in place at those levels, it doesn't have to escalate and become more and more significant. Then, of course, we look at, okay, so what are some strategies? What are some of the strategies we can use to help better manage our anxiety and bring it down? One of the big ones is making a plan. We talk about how anxiety is lack of confidence. If we make a plan, we feel more confident in handling things. So we talk a lot about making plans and what that can look like. Then we go on and talk more about emotions. We generally, in our society, I think all over the world, we generally push down our emotions and suppress them. And again, if my core belief is not good enough, I'm not going to believe in myself that I can handle feeling my emotions. So I need to push them down. So we look at what are emotions? What do they feel like physically in my body? How do I get better at being able to understand what these emotions are and feel them and let them out? As I'm doing all these things, I'm challenging that core belief and slowly believing more, I am good enough, I am important, I am valued. Shifting that core belief is not an on off switch, it's more of a dimmer where over time it's just progressively changing and challenging itself to feel more good enough, important, and valued.
Yeah, I understand that that's probably a bit of a longer process. Like you said, doesn't happen overnight when we do this, but all the little things that we work on feel like they add up to a shift that eventually happens, and we can shift some of the things that we believe about ourselves. Now, talking about the core belief of not being good enough specifically, do you find that this also ripples into things like people pleasing or just not being able to set boundaries with other people? Because that is one thing that I hear a lot about when people kind of share their mental health challenges, is that they very much open themselves up to pleasing everyone else in an effort to either avoid confrontation or just feeling not confident enough to say anything about it. So are those things connected in your opinion?
Absolutely. There's a major connection to that. My core belief is not good enough. I don't believe in myself. So now I need other people to tell me I've done a good enough job to believe in myself. So people pleasing, making sure I get that approval from other people becomes really, really significant, because then I can kind of say, okay, see, now I'm good enough. But again, I'm not really believing it myself. I need someone else to tell me that. So that core belief isn't really shifting. What ends up happening is we end up resenting that person because we're always doing something for everyone else. No one's ever reciprocating. And it ends up reinforcing and supporting that core belief, not good enough. Same with boundaries and having a voice. If I feel I'm not good enough, I'm not going to have a voice. And if I don't have a voice, how can I put boundaries in place? So we see people that often just aren't really saying anything. They struggle significantly with putting boundaries in place because they don't believe in themselves that they can put those things in place. And honestly, they don't even believe they're worthy of putting that in place. My core belief is not good enough, not important, not valued. Why would I think I have a right to put a boundary in place? It doesn't fit. And our brain likes balance. It needs to be in balance. That core belief kind of drives everything we do.
Yeah, I think it's another light bulb moment here where we're connecting the dots and the pieces. And do you find that these core beliefs, and specifically the not being good enough core belief, that is passed down in families and generations as well? Because I find that a lot of the patterns that my parents experience is also what I experience until I become aware of that and I change it. But is that something common that you find in families, that these sort of core beliefs actually get diffused to the children as well?
Generation after generation after generation. If my parents' core belief is not good enough, how can they teach me anything different? So that core belief does get passed down significantly. Sometimes we see the behaviors look a bit different, but that underlying core belief is usually still there and usually continues as significantly, or sometimes can even become a bit worse. Once we acknowledge it, work on it ourselves, then we can challenge it and develop that different core belief. But it is most definitely passed down. I can often tell in utero what that child is going to believe about themselves just by knowing the parents.
Wow, that is really powerful. On the one hand, it's kind of scary because we're getting passed down all this baggage from our parents. But on the other hand, it's also very empowering to know that we can actually do something about it and we can change that. So when adults come to the realization that this might be happening in their lives and they may need to work on some core beliefs, can they do that through your book as well and work with their children maybe at the same time? Is that something we can do?
Definitely, there's information in the book that you can use with your kids, helping your children better understand what their anxiety looks like, what they are feeling. Talking more about emotions within your family absolutely can be of huge help for your child. But really, you challenging and changing your core belief and you feeling more good enough, important, and valued is going to make a massive difference in your child's life for sure. And I think one of the things you just kind of touched on was it's being passed down. This isn't about blame. We can't just say, oh, my parents did this to me. There's no responsibility in blame. I'm not going to get any better if I just keep blaming my parents. It's realizing, okay, that's where it came from. Now I understand it. But now what do I need to do about it to do things differently? You are the only one you can control. The good thing about that is you can do something about it. The bad thing about that is you're the only one who can do anything about it. But you have to make those choices and those decisions. Blaming others is a way of avoiding responsibility.
So is there something to be said for personal accountability and our mindset and this whole thing? Because if we're stuck in sort of this mentality of blaming others, or that we're just on the effect side of the equation and we really have no power over anything, I feel like we would have a very hard time changing or challenging anything. So do the clients that you work with sometimes need a bit of help also shifting their mindset so that they can actually start transforming this core belief?
Absolutely. That is a big, big part of the counseling process, is shifting and really challenging those beliefs so that you can think and understand things a bit differently, for sure. Again, if my core belief is not good enough, not important, not valued, I'm not going to believe in myself I can take responsibility for things. So I'm going to avoid everything. I'm going to blame. I'm going to justify. I'm going to excuse. I'm going to play the victim. Once we realize that's what's going on and we start challenging that core belief, then we start believing in ourselves more, that we can take more responsibility and ownership for our own actions and behaviors. But that core belief even feeds into our ability to take responsibility for our own actions.
Yeah. I feel that happens a lot. So that's a good thing to become aware of so we can make changes
Absolutely.
in that department. Yeah. Yeah. Now, thinking about your book, if our listeners were to purchase that and start working with some of the exercises in there and the material in there, how could they support themselves through this process? I imagine that for a lot of people, and myself included, there might be heavy emotions that come up. We might be going through things as we're processing and we're uncovering things about these core beliefs that some of us might hold very deeply, and that might make a huge impact in our lives. So, what would you suggest to listeners on how they can best support themselves through this process of changing this core belief?
I think we need to go slow. We need to take time and kind of think about what you're reading in the book, get a better understanding, allow yourself to feel the emotions that are there, let it even sit for a while, and then move on to the next part. Part of the challenge in writing the book is it's a book about anxiety, about self-doubt. A lot of people who have anxiety struggle with reading. So how do you write a book for people who don't like to read? So the book is chunked into very small sections. So you really can read a half a page and stop and just take a break at that point. It's broken down into a lot of different activities and visuals. There's very few full 2 pages that are full text. So you just want to go really slow and take your time. Let yourself think about that information. Let yourself apply it to daily experiences that happen over the next few days, and then move on to the next stage. There's a very detailed as well. So if there is a lot of emotion, it's okay to flip ahead to the emotion section and kind of read through that and get a better understanding of what am I feeling, what's going on here. And often just kind of reading a little bit at a time and then just being still and just letting it soak in and absorb, think a bit about it. That can be really helpful. We often just distract, so we don't have to deal with what's going on. We can read through the book really, really quick, but we're probably not going to get as much out of it. Taking your time and just going slow, really thinking about how it applies to your life. If you have children, how it's applying to your children's life, to your partner's life, to your coworkers, your friends, that can be all very insightful in helping you gain a better understanding. Then you can move on to the next section or part of the book.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful advice. So make sure we don't get overwhelmed as you're working through that. Is there something to be said for maybe having a support system or doing this with someone else, with a buddy or an accountability buddy, to share this with someone? Would you recommend that, seeing that maybe not all listeners will have access to mental health services or counseling services at the time they might be doing that? So anything in that direction that you would recommend?
Definitely having a support system always helps with everything, for sure. A lot of couples have purchased my books. They each get their own copy and they read through to page 7 or whatever. Then they stop and they have a conversation. I strongly encourage them to, when they're doing the activities, that's their own personal experience. They don't need to share it, but to have conversations about the content can be really helpful and insightful. Then you're getting a better understanding of what's really going on. Makes it easier to address, oh, I'm not really mad at you right now. I'm actually mad at myself because my core belief is rearing its head. So I need to take a break. That other person then understands what that means and is able to do that. And they're not taking it personally. Working through it with someone else is proving to be beneficial from what I'm hearing from the couples that have been reading my book together.
That makes sense to me. I feel like that could actually really deepen your relationship as well as you're working through that. And you're starting to maybe understand the other person a little bit better as well through this process. So yeah, that's amazing.
And what it's also doing is building more connection. So you're getting better at talking with each other. I have clients that say that to me all the time. In our relationship, we don't communicate. But when I speak to each partner, they communicate well. I can understand everything they say. They're pretty articulate. So I'm like, it's not communication. It's the emotion. As soon as emotion comes up, we stop talking. So going through this, where you're talking a little bit about things that are creating some emotion, it's helping you learn how to connect and how to communicate, how to talk about things, how to feel emotions. That's going to be healthier for your relationship. Even just the practice of doing that is going to be healthier for your relationship. Add to that, gaining the understanding of what's really going on and feeding all of that makes it more significantly beneficial as well.
I feel like that could ripple into really everything. I mean, your work relationships, your friendships, it could improve communication on all fronts and actually help with just how you show up with people and how you interact. So that sounds like a good idea for everyone to practice a bit more connection and communication to help with all sorts of relationships in their lives.
For sure. The more I understand about me, the more I'm also able to be understanding of other people as well. And I can see that's about their core belief. Doesn't really have anything to do with me. That can actually make that relationship stronger because I have a better understanding of where they may be and what they might be going through and realizing I don't have to take it personally. It's not really about me at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think through the book, then you raise your own awareness to become more perceptive to those things as well. Now, I'm wondering, do you have like a favorite exercise or activity from your book that you'd like to share with our listeners? Maybe something that they could try out or do after they're done listening to this episode? Anything that you'd like to share with them?
I think an important one is getting better at being able to feel our emotions. There's an activity in the book where you basically think about a time in your life where you experienced an emotion. Let's say it's sad. So you think about a time where you've experienced sad. What happens is our brain can't really tell the difference between past and present. And so it ends up kind of feeling that emotion right now. And then what you do is you just start at your head and you work your way down your body and get a better understanding of what does sad actually feel like? What's happening in my brain? What are my eyes doing? What's happening with my jaw? Do I get a lump in my throat? What's happening with my shoulders, my neck, my chest, my breathing? How tense is my body? And you just go through your entire body, getting a better understanding of what sad feels like. If I don't know what sad feels like, it's going to be really hard for me to label it and really hard for me to feel it and let it out. So we need to get better at understanding what those emotions are. Part of the challenge is it's actually very rare that we feel one emotion. We usually feel a combination of a whole bunch at a time. So getting better at being able to recognize what those emotions are can be really, really, really helpful. On my website, but also in my book, is a list of emotions. And I'm 56 years old. If I don't really know what my emotions are and now I have to try to start to feel them, I'm going to come up blank every single time. But if I look at a list of emotions, they will pop off the page, the ones that I am feeling. So using a reference that has a list of emotions can be really helpful. Then stop and think about what does that actually feel like for me in my body? The more we're aware, the more we're going to be able to let that emotion out. And I think that's a really, really important piece for a lot of people is we just suppress those emotions and push them down at all cost.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting that you just said that because now that I think about it, there are many people that can't tell what they're feeling, even some of my close friends. When I ask them how they're feeling or how they're doing, I'm fine. I don't know. So that's actually part of, I think, what is happening. Like you said, that people don't express their emotions and they certainly don't figure out what that feels like in their body or in their mind when they sit with those emotions. So that's really great that you've put together a resource list for that. And I think that would be really helpful for listeners as well to see that.
A lot of times when I start with clients and I ask them what they are feeling, they tell me a thought because they have shut down their emotions so much. What do you mean? Feeling what? What do you mean? Angry? We're okay to feel angry. But really, besides that, happy, that's kind of it. But there are many, many, many other emotions that we work really, really, really hard to push down and suppress. Being better at being able to recognize those and feel those, then again, if I can feel those emotions, I'm challenging my core belief. I am good enough, important, and valued. Then it gets easier and easier and easier to feel those emotions because I'm believing myself more and more that I can handle doing it.
I almost feel like then you'd become better at recognizing the emotions in other people as well, which I think could be another important piece to all of this. I don't know if you talk about this in your book, but that strikes me as when we do become more aware all across the board, then we also become more aware of the feelings that other people have, which could be helpful for when we're looking to set boundaries or things like that, when we can actually maybe tell that it's not so unsafe to set the boundaries or so unsafe to express ourselves if we can better understand what the other person is feeling.
Right. And sometimes it's, oh, I need to put a boundary in place, but maybe I need to wait 20 minutes or a half an hour, let this kind of settle. It might go a little bit better. Definitely things like that can be very beneficial for sure.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I feel like your book is such a huge resource, and I'm glad it's available because, like I said, a lot of people have trouble accessing the services that they need. So having a resource available like that is very helpful. Now, you said you had quite a lengthy waiting list, but do you offer any programs or any classes or anything outside your counseling services and your book?
Usually a couple times a year, I'll do a virtual workshop and I just post it on my website. There's a page for workshops and training. Any upcoming workshops I post on there. I also do have a YouTube channel, which gives a lot of information. Again, people with anxiety, people have self-doubt, attention span can be a bit of an issue. So usually about 10 minutes long, but it talks more about all these areas as well. And my YouTube channel is Trobak Holistic Counseling.
Wonderful. And of course, we will be linking to all of Sabrina's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there for how you can connect with her. And if you are living in BC and you would like to connect with her, we'll put the information in the show notes, but just be aware that there will be a wait time. And it might be a good idea to start off with Sabrina's book in the meantime so that you can start that journey to transforming your core belief and maybe raising that awareness of what's going on in your life. And that could already be a really good first step towards challenging those beliefs that are happening in our lives. And that might be putting some rocks in our path when it comes to our healing journey. I just want to thank you, Sabrina, for being here today. And thank you for sharing all this wisdom with us. I feel like I've learned so much in this past half hour already. So I feel like your book will be such a huge resource for people. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed talking with you today.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. Take care, Sabrina.
You too.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejōrni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.